Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Harry had to admit the capital city had seen better days. Once touted as the most populous city in Westeros, most of its streets and houses were left vacant after the earthquake and tsunami that struck the city. With the Seven Kingdoms plunged into a disastrous war soon afterwards, the city's recovery was further affected. It explained why most of the buildings and streets close to the shore were left in disrepair, despite nearly 2 years had passed after the disastrous incident. Harry supposed the tourney and Stannis' coronation should lighten the city's mood, and people would start resetting the city's ghost towns and streets. He felt a tad guilty for what befell the city's people. The natural disasters unleashed by the old gods turned their livelihoods and lives upside down. He was not even sure why the old gods attacked the city in the first place. While King's Landing was the capital and home to the Great Sept of Baelor, everyone knew the true center of power of the faith was in Old Town. The High Septon of the Great Sept of Baelor was merely a figurehead the Starry Sept pretended to exist. If the old gods really wanted to attack the faith at its core, they should have attacked the Starry Sept in Old Town. Or maybe they saw some advantage in striking at King's Landing. He was no expert in divine matters or interested in divine problems unless it affected him. The only reason he interfered with the drowned god was because it was to his advantage to eliminate a hostile god that could later prove to be a hindrance in assimilating the Iron Islands. The Seven, on the other hand, had so far treated him with complete silence from their hand. Harry approved of that attitude. However, how long the silence would last has to be seen, Harry thought, eyeing the giant weirwood trees that had cropped up all over the city. Very subtle, Harry muttered. He got the distinct impression that the number of weirwood trees increased more than the last time he paid a visit to the city to facilitate the escape of the alchemists. It seemed the old gods were busy spreading their roots into the southern part of the continent at an aggressive pace. That must have also been a contributing factor in the migration of people out of King's Landing. Well, that should change now. With the coronation and the tourney, more people should feel comfortable to return, Harry mused. My lord, riders approaching. Harry's musings were interrupted while he was studying one of the weirwood trees that had cropped up near one of the abandoned streets of King's Landing. The men guarding him were on full alert with their hands on weapons. While they were supposed to be safe inside the city walls, the lack of city watch and the general unpredictability of their current situation was not lost on Harry. Therefore, Harry thought it was better to be seated on his horse while facing the riders, whether they be friends or foes. As the riders came closer, Harry relaxed slightly, seeing the Dornish riding party. He was not surprised to see Nymeria Sand and another Dornish woman, whom he assumed was her cousin, being escorted by a light escort, managed to track him down. After all, he was not exactly subtle when leaving for this part of the city. It has been a while, Nymeria. Harry greeted the girl once she pulled her horse to a stop nearby with a teasing smirk on his face. And I must say, you have grown rather tall. You meant to say beautiful, said Nymeria. Did I? Harry struck a thinking pose. I don't seem to recall thinking such a thing. Of course you did. Why else would your eyes sparkle when you look at me? Nymeria asked. Maybe they sparkle for your beautiful companion who dresses in fine silk instead of boiled leather and riding breeches, unlike some, Harry jested, trotting his horse forward until he was facing the Princess of Dorne. He had to admit Arianne Martell was indeed a beautiful woman, flowing black hair that looked like it was weaved out of a night sky, long eyelashes, large dark eyes, olive skin, full lips that held a playful smile, curvy hips, a voluptuous body, and she knew how to dress to best emphasize the curviness of her body. Not to mention that woman's breasts were perfectly round, which stood out to Harry's eyes. For a moment, Harry almost suspected Princess Arianne was a Vila with how he was reacting. He promptly dismissed that notion as he understood he was only naturally attracted to the fairer sex, and Arianne was the peak of female beauty in his eyes. Princess Arianne. Harry nodded respectfully at the heiress of Sunspear. For once, the rumors were true. Your beauty was not exaggerated. Lord Harrion, the rumors about you were sadly wrong. Most rumors in Dorne spoke of the second son of Lord Eddard having green skin and horns. And a tail. Nymeria reminded her cousin. A tail, yes. Do you have one of those hidden on your back? Arianne asked, grinning like a Cheshire cat. I'm afraid not, Princess. If I had one, it'd be on full display. Harry replied. A few minutes later, Harry walked with Nymeria and Arianne along the beaches of King's Landing. They had walked the length of the beach while their escorts were kept at a distance. The tides crashed down into the shore noisily, spraying them with salty, scented water. The gales of wind also did interesting things to the two women walking by his side. The winds flattened their clothes against the delicate contours of their bodies, which kept distracting Harry throughout their walk. I'm really under the grip of puberty, aren't I? Harry thought with some amusement as his mind overtly focused on the way Nymeria and Arianne dressed. Is it true that you can build castles out of nothing with just a thought? Arianne asked eagerly. That'd be an exaggeration of my powers. The more complex the magic, the more time it takes me to perform them. So I take it you can't build me a flying ship right now. Arianne pouted. I'm afraid not, Princess. It'll take me months to build a new airship, and sadly, all airships are assisting in transporting our men from the Westerlands. This is so unfair. I was hoping to fly among the clouds, like the Targaryens of old. Arianne sighed disappointedly. There's an easy solution to your dilemma, cousin. All you need to do is to invite Harrion to Sunspear. He could come on his airship and whisk you away into the sky. Nymeria pitched in quickly. Subtle. Harry thought amusedly at her antics. He was almost getting the feeling that Nymeria was purposefully acting obtuse and plainly evident about what was happening. Perhaps she didn't enjoy being the instrument of Doran Martell in his plan to let Arianne woo him to their side. Can you do that, Harrion? You should visit Dorne. You'll love the water gardens, said Arianne, taking his hand into her own and pressing herself against him. Well, I did promise Oberyn and Nymeria that I'd visit their home one day. I suppose I could expedite my visit to Sunspear. Oh, that's wonderful. Arianne almost purred happily at getting her way. Harry merely smiled at the rather plain attempts from Arianne Martell to try and seduce him, but he caught on to the fact that Nymeria was not wholly into the plan. He had the suspicion early on when they started conversing, but now he could read her like an open book. The way her eyebrows were pulled together and her repeated gestures with her left hand whenever Arianne behaved too friendly with him caught his eye. But Harry didn't act like he noticed any of that. He continued to act enamored with Arianne. In fact, he doubled down on his acting skills and acted like Nymeria didn't even exist, which made the Sand Snake far madder. It was then Harry confirmed that Nymeria considered him a good friend enough to feel guilty about helping her uncle manipulate him, or Harry eyed the bastard daughter of the Red Viper out of the corner of his eyes. He didn't dismiss the possibility that Nymeria could be fancying him on some level. After all, he was not the only one under the grip of hormones. This could be fun, Harry mused, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The bells tolled in the city after the crowning of Stannis Baratheon, the first of his name. The bells heralded the reign of a new king with a new heir, with Stannis Baratheon ascending the Iron Throne. His one-year-old son was now the heir to the Iron Throne. Therefore, the celebrations that followed the crowning also involved the ascension of young Steffon Baratheon as the Prince of Dragonstone. The heir of the Iron Throne was officially showcased before the entire realm, even though the child could barely make a few gurgling sounds in return after being named the Prince of Dragonstone. While the Red Keep and most parts of King's Landing were reveling in celebrations, this was not the state for the entirety of the city. For many, the tragedy that befell their loved ones in the city was far too fresh to celebrate. There were also the losses suffered because of the war to consider.
This was why Jon Arryn had fought Stannis tooth and nail for the High Septon to officiate the crowning ceremony. In the absence of the congregation of Septons sworn to the Great Sept of Baelor, the Starry Sept had chosen to name a new High Septon. Jon knew it was Old Town's way of quickly asserting themselves as the center of the Faith of the Seven, but he could hardly contest such a play at power from Old Town, because the Crown was not financially sound enough to rebuild a Grand Sept in the capital on short notice. Nor did he think he could convince Stannis to do such a thing. The effort he expended on convincing Stannis to hold the crowning ceremony using the High Septon itself was enormous. He managed to do so only because he could persuade Stannis to pick and choose his fights. Turning the Faith against the Iron Throne on the first day was not exactly good governance.
Besides, there were ample problems to deal with other than the Faith. Chief among them was the succession of Casterly Rock, the paramountcy of the Westerlands. The rewards for the loyal lords and many other lesser unaddressed issues remained at large. His eyes inadvertently fell on the delegation from Old Town, while the lords across the realm presented the newly crowned king with gifts. Have you heard any whispers from the High Towers? Jon whispered to the Master of Whispers. They've been in talks with Lord Florent seeking support for Baelor Blacktide's claim on the island. They've amassed support from the Starry Sept. It seems Baelor Blacktide has taken the Seven, and it has been Old Town's greatest ambition to see the Iron Islands converted to the faith, Very whispered back. They are confident to support Baelor Blacktide. It'll not be the first time Old Town attempted to subvert the Ironborn culture, said Jon. I do not know. Lord Hand, now that His Grace has shown himself open to splitting off some islands from the Ironborn to the north, they might be sensing an opportunity, Varys said with a thoughtful frown. This won't sit well with the Northerners, Jon muttered. Perhaps Lord Stark won't protest much, seeing as Baelor Blacktide was a hostage in Old Town ever since the last rebellion and had nothing to do with the recent Ironborn raid on the north, said Varys. It's not that I'm worried about, Jon muttered, but he shook his head when Varys looked at him in askance. Have you heard of any discontent from the Northerners? There is always discontent in the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Arryn. The North is no exception. Their complaint is that they tire of wars in the South, a relatable sentiment everyone shares, said Varys, waving his hand dismissively. Jon was placated somewhat upon hearing Varys's words. The Master of Whispers had been his sole ally in the small council during the trying times of the last few years. Therefore, Varys's words brought some much-needed comfort to his mind. Why the sudden concern about our northern friends, Lord Hand? I've always thought the Northmen were the easiest to rule for a king sitting on the Iron Throne. Historically, they've been the least troublesome lot for the Targaryen reign until Aerys Targaryen burned a Stark alive. You are right, of course. It seems Harry Stark knows the right words to say to get what he wants, Jon muttered. I wouldn't be so sure, my lord. Huh? What do you mean? Jon raised a questioning eyebrow at Varys. From what my little bird says, the young Stark is quite smitten by the Dornish princess. They've been joined at the hip since they were properly introduced. It seems young Harry Stark, despite his colorful personality and achievements, is just a boy, said Varys.
The Dornish. Of course, I had forgotten all about him in the haste of the coronation.
Jon thought. Adopting a stern visage, Jon fully looked at the Master of Whispers. Tell me everything that Prince Oberyn has been up to in the city. I see my niece has more than captured your interest, Tyrion, said Oberyn, his dark eyes glittering playfully. Harry eyed Arianne Martell, sitting a step below him on the stands with Nymeria as the tourney progressed. A Knight of House Florent was trying his best to unseat a Knight of House Broom. The knights had already taken 3 passes against each other, and no clear victor could still be seen. The crowd was enthused to see the 2 knights battling it out in the joust. Princess Arianne is charming and beautiful, Harry replied, and judging by the laughter coming from Oberyn, it was the right thing to say. Arianne tells me she extended you an invitation to Sunspear. Oh yes, she invited me to visit the Water Gardens as well, said Harry. Have you accepted? Oberyn asked curiously. I'll have to consult with my father for the specifics. Otherwise, yes. I'd love to visit Sunspear and the Water Gardens, Harry answered, grinning at the Red Viper. Harry was quite amused to see how easy it was to manipulate the Martells. Prince Oberyn was a strong warrior he respected, but he supposed political intrigue was not the Red Viper's forte. Jorah Martell must be the brains, and Oberyn the brawn, Harry thought. The stands erupted in cheers as the Florent Knight managed to unseat the Brune on the 5th pass. Did you know the Hightowers have brought Baelor Blacktide along with them? I've been told the Hightowers had a long meeting with Lord Arryn last night. Harry grunted, but didn't look bothered by the information Oberyn so graciously shared. Do you not understand what this means? The Hightowers are throwing their support behind Baelor Blacktide so that he can reclaim the island of Blacktide from you. I was approached by Lord Arryn with the matter of Baelor Blacktide. Lord Arryn was convinced Lord Baelor Blacktide would be a good lord to keep the peace on the island and swear oaths to Avalon and Winterfell, said Harry. You realize this is a trap, right? The Faith has been trying their best to convert the Iron Islands into the Faith, and I know they've failed innumerable times. Harry finished for Oberyn. I know enough, Prince Oberyn. So, what did you say? Oberyn asked curiously. Nothing except that I'll think about it. And Oberyn looked curiously at him, but the crier chose that moment to announce the next knights to partake in the joust. From the Stormlands, Sir Patrick Swan. From the Iron Islands, Sir Balor Blacktide. The crier announced loud and clear. The crowd erupted in cheers as the two knights emerged on their horses, armed to the teeth. The knights waved their hands to the crowd as they took position against each other in the tourney ground. The knights charged with their lances at the ready when the horn was blown. On the first pass, both knights broke their lances, but managed to stay on their horses. The people cheered as both knights took up new lances and rode against each other. Magic flared up in Harry's hand, and he cast the Confundus charm on the Stormlander knight without anyone noticing. At the last minute, Sir Patrick Swan raised the tip of his lance so that its tip punched straight into the neck of Sir Bay, or Blacktide. The last Blacktide was blown off his feet and smashed into the ground on his back. The stands let out a collective gasp at what happened, as men rushed to aid the downed knight. It was later announced that Sir Baelor Blacktide succumbed to his wound and died with a splintered piece of wood lodged in his throat. The young knight had bled out, with masters unable to stop blood flow. Well, that neatly ties up the question of Blacktide, doesn't it? Harry said with a grin. His hands were clean as far as the public was concerned, and Old Town lost their first pawn in the game. He was not amused by their little play to try and get at the Iron Islands at his expense. It was almost enough to revisit his current agreements with the Reach for the fleet they were building for him. In the end, Harry decided to cut down on the numbers instead, as he could now outsource that work to Harlaw and Blacktide. All he had to do was provide them with timber and gold. With most of his work finished in the capital, Harry was ready to leave the city and never return. The sentencing of Jaime Lannister and Joffrey Waters was an event in which he was the least bothered. The outcome of that trial was not in any way interesting to his plans. Therefore, Harry departed early from King's Landing, leaving the Dornish to try their little plots on his father instead. He had an interesting companion accompanying him to the Riverlands. Harry had the distinct pleasure of getting acquainted with the Master of Coin, Petyr Baelish. It was the same man his grandfather expelled from Riverrun for fornicating with his Aunt Lisa. Harry hadn't initially thought much of the man on their journey, but he had the distinct displeasure of peeking inside the man's mind. After getting disturbing information from Baelish's mind, Harry was faced with killing a hostile snake or allowing it to flourish in the south. In the end, he chose to go ahead with the latter option. Despite Petyr Baelish's obvious animosity for his family, the man remains a useful troublemaker. Harry was confident with snakes like Baelish hanging around the royal court. It was only a matter of time before the Iron Throne would find itself in trouble. Chaos is a ladder. Harry was quite disappointed to see the restoration works on Moat Cailin had lagged so much that the workers only managed to restore 2 of the 20 towers in 2 years. It was to be expected, with the war in the Westerlands taking up most able-bodied men from across the north. The same had happened in Avalon with his planned port expansion. The lack of workers had pushed his plans back a year, and it got further pushed back when he went to war against the Iron Islands. The lack of men directly affected the work as well as the availability of materials and transportation of goods. The only saving grace was that the roads in the north were restored to pristine condition before war broke out in the southern kingdoms. "It's a shame we allowed Moat Cailin to go to ruin like this," Harry complained, staring at the shoddy state of the massive structure. "The Starks of old must be rolling in their graves at this travesty." The walls were non-existent as they had fallen due to disrepair and centuries of neglect. After the Targaryen conquest, only 3 towers remained standing, and all 3 were covered in green moss until the workers restored 2 last year. The Children's Tower and the Gatehouse Tower were restored, as were their walls. However, the Drunkard's Tower remained in disrepair, with little to no crenellations remaining on its crown, and retained the lean it was famous for. Your ancestors can't be blamed for abandoning the moat. The North had never seen war on its soil after the conquest. 3 centuries of peace can dull the defenses of a castle. Howland Reed said noncommittally, "Peace is the time to prepare for war," said Harry.
I see.
"What about war?" Lord Reed asked, keeping a close eye on Harry. Harry eyed the Lord of Greywater, watched closely out of the corner of his eyes. Howland Reed was the sole survivor other than his father after they confronted Aerys Targaryen's Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy. The man was short and thin like most crannogmen of the Neck, which was a good trait to have for an inhabitant of the Neck. Lord Red was also a close confidant and friend of his father. Considering the man had a hand in keeping Jon's secret, it was not surprising. Growing up in Winterfell, Harry had heard many tales from his father about the war, and Howland Reed was always spoken of fondly in those tales. However, Harry thought it was impractical for the Lord of Greywater Watch to carry around a trident as his primary weapon. Impractical but cool. Harry amended his opinion when Lord Reed shifted the trident to his left hand. The bronze weapon gleamed in the sunlight, making it look like it was made of gold. For a moment, he wondered why Lord Reed carried around a trident made of bronze in an area filled with swamps. "War is the time to kill enemies and establish peace," said Harry. "Is that why you're adamant about restoring Moat, Cailin?" Lord Reed asked curiously. "Enemies to the south, enemies to the north, enemies to the east, and enemies to the west. It's because we were ruled by those who were blind to the south and refused to see strength in themselves. This has happened." Harry nodded at the ruins of the once grand fort that guarded the north against multiple invasions from the Andals. "It's not a good way to live, seeing enemies in 4 directions," Lord Reed commented. "It'll be a short and insignificant life if one pretends there are no enemies," Harry countered. "That's true," Lord Reed nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why you are securing the gift and the neck with new castles and ancient strongholds restored at a fast pace? What foe are you preparing for?" Lord Harrion. "To the south lies all the wars that are yet to be fought over the Iron Throne. They'll wage war after war for the possession of the throne, and the north will one day wake up and realize there are no dragons to threaten us. When that day comes, the flames of independence will be lit in the minds of every Northman from the neck to the wall," said Harry. Pointing north, Harry stared at Lord Reed. "I hope I don't need to tell you what lies beyond the wall. In time, our ancient enemy shall rise, and the dead with it to assault the wall. To the east and west, the North's natural expansion in maritime trade would ensure conflict with the Three Sisters and the Iron Islands. Now, do you see the enemies I see, Lord Reed? Even if all that I said is discarded, you're at least aware that the secret you have so carefully guarded all these years out of your friendship with my aunt and father is enough cause for a war with the Iron Throne." "You know?" Lord Reed breathed, staring at Harry with surprise. "Of course, I had my doubts, and when I confronted my father with my suspicions, he told me the truth." "I see." There was a moment of silence between them that stretched enough to become awkward. "Tell me, Lord Reed, what is your opinion on a canal connecting Saltspear and the Bight?" Harry suddenly asked, which surprised Howland Reed. "A canal connecting Saltspear and the Bight?" Howland asked in shock. "Yes. There'll come a time in the near future when the North's shipping might get threatened in the Sunset Sea. It'll be advantageous if our Western fleet gets access to the Bight and the Narrow Sea. It'll undoubtedly bolster our trade with the free cities of Essos," said Harry. "Where exactly do you plan on building this canal?" Lord Reed asked, keeping his opinions about the idea hidden behind an emotionless mask. "I was hoping to cut a channel through the Fever River, passing by Moat Cailin into the Bight. It'll be the easiest route to cut a canal through the neck." "That'd kill the neck," said Lord Reed with horror. "What'd you mean?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. "The Fever River is the lifeblood of the neck. If you cut a canal through it, it'll kill the river and the entire swamp south of the moat." I hadn't considered that," Harry muttered thoughtfully. "Do you think you can take me through the Fever River? I'd like to see the river and its branches." Fortunately for Harry, Lord Reed happily took him on a rowboat across the Fever River. It took them a few days to travel the entire length of the river across its many branches, spread out along the breadth of the neck. Though he lost a couple of days tracing out the intricate channels of the river, Harry was glad he spent the time to know the river. Not only did he get a better idea of how the swamp worked, but he also had the opportunity to understand better the crownermen living in the neck. He also got the opportunity to hunt and camp with Lord Reed and his children, Jojen and Mira Reed. However, their journey came to an end, and they returned to Moat Cailin. Inside the ruins of the castle, they set up camp for the night. Harry joined Lord Reed in cooking the sea trout skewered on a stick in the fire the Lord of Greywater Watch made. For the entirety of the trip, Harry had chosen to go Muggle, in parts to get a glimpse into the everyday life of the crannogmen. The canal would either drain the swamp or flood the neck. It also could flood the interior of the neck with seawater. Harry admitted building the canal through the Fever River would be a disaster. "I'm heartened that you see the danger a canal would bring," Never mind, it'd take decades to build such a massive canal spanning more than 100 leagues, and the cost such a construction would bear. Lord Reed said with a relieved sigh. You misunderstand me, Lord Reed, Harry said, keeping his eyes firmly on the fire preparing his dinner. I'm not abandoning the merit of building a canal connecting Salt Spear and the Bight. I'm merely abandoning the idea of building it through the Fever River. What do you mean? Lord Reed looked at him warily. I plan to build a canal around the Fever River and Moat Cailin without ever touching even an ounce of fresh water of the neck. This way, the neck can maintain its swamp without flooding and prevent salination from threatening its ecosystem, said Harry, turning the trout so that its other side could get fried adequately by the fire. Wouldn't that be lengthy? Oh, yes. Instead of a straight canal, I'm thinking of carving out a canal in a wide arc around the moat and the Fever River. It'll directly connect Salt Spear to the Bight, Harry thought aloud while Howland Reed stared at him with his mouth agape. Of course, this means I'll have to get permission from Lady Dustin to complete the canal. Here, have a look. Harry picked the map he had rolled up in his pocket and offered it to Lord Reed. Harry enjoyed the way Lord Reed's thin eyebrows climbed all the way to his hairline after taking one look at the map. This is certainly ambitious, Howland Reed said with some restraint after seeing the map with his own eyes. How do you plan to build it? Where will you find the workers to build something like this? Did Brandon the Builder build the wall using manual labor, Lord Reed? Harry asked amusedly. No, I won't be building the canal using men. I'll have it built using magic as soon as White Harbor and Avalon fields the fleets capable of guarding our western and eastern shores. I see, Lord Reed muttered after an extended period of thoughtful silence. You don't have to worry, Lord Reed. Harry clapped the man on his shoulder. It'll take time to prepare the magic necessary to carve out the canal. As you said, it's more than 100 leagues long channel and act as a second line of defense against any invading army from the south. Has Lord Stark approved of this canal? Lord Reed asked curiously. Not yet. I have mentioned it in passing, but I had not considered the canal seriously until now. I'm curious, though, how will you carve out a canal longer than the wall at the neck? Lord Reed asked curiously, taking a bite of the fried trout in his hand. The same way I built Avalon, using runes. Harry shrugged, taking the trout out of the fire after seeing it was properly cooked. After allowing it to cool for a minute, Harry took a heart bite out of the fish. The delicate spices of Dorne exploded in his mouth, adding some flavor to the sweet taste of the sea trout. He savored the fish in his mouth and took another bite, feeling his appetite grow. You know, you remind me of someone, Lord Reed said, looking a tad sad. Who? Harry asked, savoring the taste and smell of the fish. Your Aunt Lyanna. She also had the same look when she tasted the sea trout of the neck for the first time. Lord Reed said with an amused look. I suppose it runs in the family, Harry grinned. Tell you what, I'll pay you a hefty sum of gold if you can provide Avalon with a steady supply of fish from the neck. You could start several fish farms to breed them aplenty. Fish farms? Lord Reed muttered thoughtfully. Harry was only too happy to explain the concept to the Lord of Greywater Watch. He could have captured a couple of sea trout from the river and farmed them in Avalon, but he felt like the crannogman of the neck needed the silver more than he did. Besides, it was unhealthy to hoard all the good things in the world in one place. Or maybe he was being nice to the people of the neck. They're short, silent folk, aren't they? I like him, Harry thought. Lord Reed, what's your opinion on having Jojen foster at Avalon? Stannis Baratheon walked the Trader's Walk, leading to a squat, half-round tower. This particular tower, like almost most places in the Red Keep, was built by Maegor Targaryen to house prisoners. The topmost levels of the tower were reserved for prisoners of higher standing. After all, ransoming knights and lordlings have been part of war since ancient times. Stannis also saw no need to break the tradition, as he also had several high-ranking prisoners imprisoned in the upper levels of the tower for ransom. Most of them were Lannisters and their loyalists. House Lannister was required to cough up their weights in gold to have them released. Of course, that might be a little difficult for the Lions of the West, seeing as he had looted their treasury. However, he was confident House Lannister could find the gold in time once they mined more of their precious gold. Or maybe they could borrow from the Iron Bank if they lacked the gold. At least the war also helped wipe out the Iron Throne's debt to House Lannister. As part of the punishment for rebelling, he had declared all outstanding debts owed to House Lannister by the lords of Westeros as null and void. It was one of his most popular royal decrees, he issued at the suggestion of Lord Baelish. The Master of Coin not only secured the Iron Throne's finances, but also helped him earn goodwill from many lords and knights across the Seven Kingdoms. It was one of the reasons why he was keeping Pettier Baelish as the Master of Coin. Stannis stopped as he reached the ground floor, and the guards unlocked the doors to the dungeon. The iron doors were dragged open, letting Stannis descend a flight of stairs into a dimly lit corridor. There were 4 levels to the dungeons built by Magor, the crew. The first level was used to imprison common criminals from the small folk. The second level had personal cells without windows for holding highborns. The third level was reserved for the worst enemies of the crown, and it was called the Black Cells because the entire level was submerged in darkness. The fourth and the last level holds the torture chambers. The third and fourth levels had remained unused since Robert's reign began, but Stannis broke that tradition by chucking Jaime Lannister and Joffrey Waters into the Black Cells. The guards accompanying him lead the way with oil lamps in their hands to ward off the darkness of the Black Cells. "Your Grace," the guard stopped before a cell. "Open the cell," he ordered. The guards unlocked the wooden cell and pushed the door open. "Were my orders followed to the letter?" Stannis asked coldly to the guard holding the door open for him. "Yes, Your Grace. We have fed Sir Diem, but deprived the bastard of water and bread," the guard immediately replied. "Good. Wait outside," Stannis ordered before taking one of the oil lamps and entering the cell without an escort. He didn't need an escort because both prisoners were chained to the wall. "I hope I'm not intruding on your sleep, Kingslayer," said Stannis, poking the former Kingsguard knight with his foot. Stannis stared dispassionately as Jaime Lannister groaned and tried to shield his eyes from the light of the oil lamp in his hand. He could hear quiet sobbing coming from a dark corner of the cell. But Stannis refused to take his eyes away from the Kingslayer, who eventually adjusted to the light of the lamp in the dark cell. "Stop this, I beg of you. Joffrey is just a child," Jaime whispered hoarsely. "You hold the power to alleviate the boy's suffering, Kingslayer. Admit you're the boy's father before the court. Confess to the crimes of your sister to the realm, and I'll have the boy's thirst quenched. If I do that, you'll kill us both. I remember you gloating over my Uncle Kevin's beheading." Jaime muttered. "Wrong," Stannis snapped. "You committed the crime, Kingslayer. I have enough honor to see no fault in your children for your crimes. Unlike Kevin Lannister, who followed your father's command to burn the Reach, your children were not at fault for your incestuous relationship with your sister." Stannis looked searchingly at Jaime Lannister's face and only found defeat and helplessness on the once arrogant knight's face. A year of captivity in Storm's End and watching his son starve to death would break even the proudest of lions. Stannis mused. "Then let me give you this assurance, Kingslayer. If you confess to your crimes and that of your sister, I vow to let your son live. He can be inducted into the faith or the Citadel. The boy can live an anonymous life, away from the eyes of the realm." Stannis had no intention of honoring such a promise. He had already decided to let the boy Joffrey spend the rest of his miserable life at the Wall. He was confident the wildlings or the frigid air of the north would do him the service of taking the boy's life. Seeing the hesitant look on the Kingslayer's face, Stannis knew the Lannister knight was nearly caving in. "If I capture Cersei, I vow she'll be sent to the Silent Sisters, as will Myrcella. You have dishonored your family and the Kingsguard. Kingslayer, confess and save the lives of your son, daughter, and sister. Your silence has already claimed the lives of your father, uncles, friends, and many others. Speak the truth and end this bloodshed," Stannis said, and that was the final push needed for Jaime Lannister to break. The very next day, Stannis held the court and allowed Jaime Lannister to confess his crimes before all the major lords of Westeros. When the Kingslayer finished confessing to his crimes of incest, cuckolding his king and usurping House Baratheon, Stannis felt like a weight was lifted off his shoulder. With Jaime Lannister confessing his incestuous relationship with Cersei and claiming Joffrey and Myrcella as a product of that illicit affair, Stannis felt more secure on the Iron Throne. But he was wise enough to know he had only defeated the foes in House Lannister. If he could not prove himself capable of ruling the Seven Kingdoms, more enemies would crop up to test the weaknesses of the Iron Throne's hold on Westeros. There was work to be done to restore King's Landing, and then he had to reinsure the loyalties of the Storm Lords and his closest allies. There were many enemies to be wary of, which only accelerated the execution of Jaime Lannister and the consequent sentencing of Joffrey Waters to the Night's Watch. He gave the task of escorting Joffrey Waters to the Wall to the Northerners. At the same time, he offered the post of Master of Ships to Lord Redwyne on Jon Arryn's advice. He had a feeling Lord Redwyne was surprised by the offer, as his dislike of Reachman was well known. The Dornish were further appeased by giving them Amory Lorch, and the loot they took from the city of Lannisport remained uncontested by the Iron Throne. The Northerners were happy with their 2 new islands in the Sunset Sea. The Stormlords were rewarded for their loyalty by admitting them to most of the open positions in the Red Keep and the City Watch. There was a strong push from almost all corners of Westeros to have Casterly Rock attained from House Lannister. However, he resisted such pressures, heeding the counsel of Lord Jon Arryn. Instead, he attained Lannisport from the Lannisters and sought to appoint a proper house to rule the city instead of House Lannister. For now, a small contingent of the royal fleet under the command of Ser Davos was keeping the city together. The succession of Casterly Rock naturally reverted to Tyrion Lannister as the sole living son of Tywin Lannister. The dwarf was an easy choice to make, as Stannis hoped the internal strife of House Lannister would keep them busy rather than plot revenge against House Baratheon. But first, he needed to find the blasted dwarf and Tyrion Lannister. The sea breeze of Sea Dragon Point was quite comforting for Harry after months of his departure from the north. While he liked Winterfell, Avalon had become his home in his mind. The comfort and safety he felt in Avalon was something he missed for nearly a year, and he was enjoying his return. The war in the south had forced him to depart for Winterfell and made him spend all the time there as the Stark of Winterfell. After that, the Ironborn attack took him out of the north, further estranging him from Avalon. But now he was back. He especially loved the walk among the pine and apple trees of Avalon. The peace with the steady thrum of magic in the castle was something he missed in his time away. The people were also happy to see his return. After all, his return meant the war was officially over and their loved ones were on their way. Not all of them will be back, Harry thought. While the campaign in the Westerlands and the Iron Islands ended in victory for the North, that victory came at a cost in blood. War always brought death to both sides, and the North was not exempted from this cosmic law. At least, the men he lost in the Iron Islands were very few, and that was the only relief he could give to the people of Avalon. On the other hand, the men mustered by his father suffered greater attrition in the Westerlands. Then, some died due to sickness or suffered permanent fatal injuries. The ugly reality of war was that the suffering continued even after the suspension of all hostilities. Peace is an illusion, or, more accurately, fleeting, Harry mused. Therefore, he knew to enjoy the little things in life to keep himself from tipping over to the side of madness like he did in the past. My lord. Harry found Maester Marwyn walking towards him with his shiny staff in hand, accompanied by the twins, Josera and Elsera. He was thankful Maester Marwyn had taken the twins under his wing and started training them to take up some of his duties. As it turned out, Elsera's magical power was phenomenal. When Harry discovered she had one of the most potent, magically powerful blood, he immediately understood her to be a special case. She had a unique condition and connection with magic that turned her blood into a sponge for chaotic magic. In the wizarding world, such wizards and witches were called blood mages, and their powers over enchantment and curse breaking were phenomenal. Knowing this, Harry had charted a special course for Elsera that focused on charms, transfiguration, battle magic, potions, and alchemy. Maester Marwyn was also teaching her the art of healing, which only complemented her magical studies. Jon Snow, on the other hand, was a gifted warg, but without the same potential as his twin sister. Therefore, Harry only focused on developing the skill of warging and runes for Jon, with some training with melee weapons in the yard. Maester Marwyn took one look at Jon's warging prowess and took the boy as an apprentice, teaching him ravenry. Harry was quite happy to see the twins were progressing along nicely. They had at first been disgruntled to be left in Avalon by their father. They had some abandonment issues, but Harry kept them entertained and engaged by opening the wondrous doors to magic and the infinite possibilities that it offered. Perhaps it's time that I take a more hands-on approach in teaching them magic, Harry mused. Maester Marwyn, Josera, and Elsera. What's the matter? Harry asked once they came close. A raven came from the capital. Jaime Lannister confessed to his crimes before the court and admitted to the charge of adultery and incest. The false knights have claimed Joffrey and Myrcella as his children before the court. King Stannis writes the Lannister knight was stripped of his white cloak and was executed for his crimes. I see, Harry muttered disinterestedly. Bending down, he picked up a shiny seashell. He took fancy from the sand. I'm making a seashell necklace for Sansa. Her name's day is approaching, Harry explained to the twins. Was there anything else? He asked, when the trio remained standing. King Stannis has also issued a bounty of 50,000 dragons for Cersei Lannister, alive or dead, Maester Marwyn tentatively said, making Harry scoff. If Robert Baratheon was not able to get 2 orphan children killed for more than a decade, I doubt his brother will do any better with a grown woman, said Harry, shaking his head at the decision to openly proclaim the intent to murder a woman in a martial society like Westeros. He had hoped Stannis Baratheon was far smarter than this. The newly crowned king just showed the whole of Westeros how petty and easily riled he could become. The man could have sent assassins discreetly to off the former queen if he desperately wanted her dead that much. There is one other thing, my lord. Marwyn spoke before nodding at Elsa. The young blood mage stepped forward and offered him a rock. I was visited by a child of the forest and was given this, my lord. She asked me to deliver this to you. She said you'd know to read her intent from the rock, said Elsera, offering the rock with a curious look on her face. You've tried deciphering the magic surrounding the rock, right? Harry asked amusedly. I did, my lord. I apologize. Elsera looked down, guiltily. Never apologize for using your magic, said Harry. Instead of trying to force the magic to reveal what's on that rock, why don't you try to warm the rock with your magic? His suggestion earned him an intrigued look from Elsera. Warm the rock with my magic? Yes. Imagine that you are heating the rock with fire. Now keep that thought in your mind and urge the magic in your hand to do the same to the rock. Harry directed the girl and helped her to do the task. Just as he promised, the rock glowed with painted runes on its surface, making Elsera gasp in surprise. How? How did you know, my lord? Elsera asked, her inquisitive coal eyes trained on him with wonder he had often seen in many young wizards and witches in the past. Sensing magic is a skill that'll develop in time. You just have to learn to listen to the tunes of magic, Harry explained. His attention went back to the message written in runes. Most curious, Harry muttered. We also received a missive from the Iron Bank while you were away, my lord. An auction was concluded a few weeks back, said Maester Marwyn. Why didn't you lead with that? Harry asked, rolling his eyes at the old maester. The old maester always had the priorities backwards. After all, who cared a shit about what happened to some prissy Lannister in the south? Cailin envied the lives of magisters in the free cities. The political system within most free cities was such that wealth translated to political power. While the Essos made their fortunes using slave labor in the slave trade, he could not find much difference compared to the relationship between Westerosi lords and the small folk. Of course, there were regions in Westeros that treated the small folk better and not as cattle, but that was the same case for the free cities. The Brerevosi treated their less fortunate citizens better than most, and there were magisters in other free cities who treated their slaves and gave them better living conditions than the small folk of Westeros. But the lack of constant wars attracted Jurian the most to Essos. Of course, wars were waged between the free cities, but they were sparingly waged and mostly fought between sellsword companies. There was no bloodletting the likes of which Westeros saw every 2 decades. In the Summer Islands, the people had it much better with their ritualistic war. All major disputes in the Summer Isles were settled by warriors fighting in place of giant armies. Not only did the ritualistic fights avoid unnecessary bloodshed, but they also provided a nice bit of entertainment and revenue for the princes and the people. He had been one of the fortunate men from Westeros to have the chance to witness a ritualistic battle between 2 warriors over a land dispute between 2 princes of the Summer Isles. The same dispute could have burned a few villages in Westeros. He supposed it was one of the reasons why he was always traveling instead of pursuing any of the duties Tywin had assigned to him in the Westerlands. And right now, he had even more reason never to set foot on Westeros after the recent war. However, he was not the only one affected by the happening in Westeros. Ever since word reached them about the defeat of House Lannister and the fall of the Rock, Tyrion and Tyrion were bracing themselves for the inevitable news about Jaime to come any day. So, when word reached them about Jaime's execution at the hands of Stannis Baratheon, it came as no surprise. But what surprised them was the rumors of Jaime confessing to his crimes and claiming Joffrey and Marcella as his children. Tyrion desperately wanted to believe the rumors were untrue and merely the product of Stannis Baratheon's propaganda to malign the Lannister name. But once he ascertained the validity of the information, he was puzzled on what to do next. Tyrion was not at all comfortable with the position he was dealt with by the insistence of his late older brother. In the absence of Tywin and Jaime, the seat of Casterly Rock was now Tyrion's by all the laws of gods and men. However, he'd have to travel to King's Landing and prostrate before the Iron Throne to ensure Tyrion inherited the Rock. Even then, he was not sure whether Stannis Baratheon would be amenable to grant the castle to Tyrion. He didn't know what was going through Tyrion's mind. Ever since word reached them about Jaime's execution, Tyrion had fallen silent. Tyrion suspected the helplessness of the situation must haunt Tyrion more than anyone else. They had tried to cajole the Golden Company to take up the contract for House Lannister in their fight against the Iron Throne. Unfortunately, the sellswords were disinterested in signing a contract. Their reasons were sound, and Tyrion could hardly refute them when they pointed out they lacked a fleet to cross the narrow sea. Besides, they were already too late in contacting the Golden Company. Even if Tyrion had somehow hired enough sells to the cause, there was no guarantee that the royal fleet wouldn't engage them in transit. The captains of the Golden Company had also pointed out that it'd be futile to expect their movements to remain unseen from the Dornish. According to the captains of all the major sellsword companies, sailing a fleet through the Stepstones and landing the troops in the Stormlands was an impossible task without ensuring Dornish neutrality. "Have you decided on what you are to do, nephew?" Tyrion asked as they lounged on a cushion in Magister Vagrys' mansion. "I must return to Westeros," said Tyrion. "You realize what that entails? The Iron Throne could have our heads, despite our lack of participation in the war. If I don't return now, I stand to lose Casterly Rock. Forgive me for saying this. Uncle, my head is less valuable to me than the Rock," said Tyrion. "If you don't have your head, you won't be having the Rock," Tyrion pointed out. "If I don't have the Rock, there won't be much use for my head," Tyrion replied. "That's where you are wrong, nephew. Have you thought of leaving Westeros and starting a new life elsewhere?" Tyrion inquired. "Once, when I was much younger, I thought of running away to a far-off land unreachable from the hawkish eyes of my father. But I later realized it was a stupid dream. Seeking a home elsewhere is not stupid, Tyrion. Look at me, uncle. Do you think a disfigured dwarf like me will get it any better elsewhere?" Tyrion asked, with a raised eyebrow. "At least in Westeros, I have the Lannister name." To his shame, Tyrion could not argue against his nephew on that point. As a well-traveled man, he knew Tyrion was right. But Westeros had never been this dangerous for his nephew. It was not just Stannis Baratheon they had to worry about. With House Lannister as weakened as it was, all their enemies would be surrounding their house like vultures and feast on their family's carcass. There was also the internal strife waiting to happen if Tyrion was to pursue his claim on the Rock. After all, Tywin had no shortage of enemies inside House Lannister, and they'd be out in numbers to keep the Rock out of Tyrion's hands. "Did you wonder why we never heard any mention of Kevin?" Tyrion suddenly asked. "What do you mean, uncle?" Tyrion asked. "Kevin was captured by Stannis Baratheon in the Reach. Why do you think he was not sentenced to death or even sent to the Wall till now?" Tyrion posed the question to his nephew, whose face fell into a thoughtful frown. "You think Stannis wants Uncle Kevin to inherit the Rock?" Tyrion asked. Tyrion knew his nephew was trying to hide his emotions, but he could read the boy easily. He knew a profoundly ambitious and cunning face was hiding deep inside Tyrion. Now more than ever, he understood Tyrion would not let Casterly Rock slip from his grasp. Tyrion couldn't help but shake his head as the realization came to him. "Why are you smiling, uncle?" Tyrion asked with a frown. "I was merely amused by the fact that of all the children of Tywin, you resembled him the most. It's quite ironic, isn't it? Lord Lannister." Tyrion grinned at his nephew, who looked surprised by his observation. "I'm not like my father." Tyrion vehemently denied, shaking his head. "On that we can agree. Impep." Tyrion suppressed a groan when Cersei walked in on that moment with a swagger. "Niece," Tyrion nodded curtly at the woman who single-handedly destroyed House Lannister and everything Tywin built. "Uncle, I assume you're here to do something about those who wronged our house, said Cersei, sliding onto a couch across from them, gracefully. We are looking at the one who wronged our house, Tyrion said coldly, glaring at Cersei with an intensity that made Jurian blink in surprise. I was not talking to you, Cersei, bit out. Cersei, Jurian said firmly, attracting his niece's attention. Jaime is dead. What? Cersei's face lost all color. Jaime was executed by Stannis Baratheon for cuckolding the king. Before he died, he confessed his crimes and claimed Joffrey and Myrcella as his children, Jurian said quietly. No, this is wrong. You're lying. Cersei shouted, jumping to her feet and turning her blazing eyes on Tyrion. You! This is your work, demon. Sit the fuck down, Tyrion snarled. You'll not blame me for your mistakes anymore. Because of you, Jaime lost his life, and only the gods know what happened to Joffrey or anyone else with the Lannister name. Joffrey, what happened to my son? Cersei fell to her knees with tears freely rolling down her cheeks. Uncle, please tell me, what happened to my son? I do not know, niece. You'll have to prepare your mind for the worst. Tyrion said truthfully, No. Cersei screamed. It took him some effort to force Cersei to take the dream wine. She was inconsolable, and Jurian had the feeling she'd be challenging to handle in the coming days. Despite Cersei's wrongdoings, Jurian could only see her as the bright child she once was. Once Cersei fell asleep muttering all the time about Joffrey, Jurian stepped out of her room while servants nursed her. If you return, you might be forced to do unspeakable things, Tyrion. Stannis Baratheon won't stop hunting for Cersei and Myrcella. Do you think you can maintain a level head and endure for the sake of the rest of the family? You might be forced to watch your sister and niece suffer like Alia Martell and her children. The silence that he received from Tyrion made him understand that his nephew was thinking deeply about the matter. Now you realize what is at stake, nephew. It's not that you have to harm hundreds and thousands for every scrap of power as Lord of the Rock. The challenge would be to live with your decisions, knowing that you have betrayed friends and family to get what you want. Harry was reading the reports about the glass-making units functioning within Avalon. The war had not put a dent in the output or earnings from selling glass. The revenue had only increased as more and more Essos markets opened for Avalonian glass. Since glass from Avalon was now generating a brand value of its own due to his reputation and the quality of designs, Harry was planning to etch a marker on the glass itself instead of the crates. He wouldn't put it past the Myrish to exploit his reputation and sell off their wares poised as Avalonian glass. They might even sell faulty, low-quality glass masqueraded as Avalonian glass to harm his reputation. I'll need to make some modifications in the glass work, Harry decided, nodding to himself. He wrote down a quick reminder in his diary. After that, he went to the backlog reports meticulously filed by Maester Marwyn. The records were about reports from White Harbor about his suggestion to send selected sailors to train with the Manderley fleet. The plan was to get some sailors from Avalon to get some real-life experience in naval battles. The pirates in the Three Sisters had graciously offered themselves as training dummies by their continued aggression on merchant ships coming in and out of White Harbor. Despite repeated warnings given to the Vale and the lords of the Three Sisters, they had refused to act against the pirates based out of the islands. Therefore, they had come to a decision to use the situation to their advantage. While the Bight and the Narrow Sea don't have the same seafaring conditions as the Sunset Sea, Harry was sure the battle experience would come in handy someday. Besides, he was discreetly warned by his budding spy network. He had the warlocks create that there were plans by his rivals in Myr to hire pirates to target ships from the north. It would not work so long as the Braavosi fleet sailed the Narrow Sea, but it was better to be prepared. A knock on the door made Harry look up from the parchments lying about on his desk. Come in. The door opened, and Harry saw Jon step into his chamber. The airship has returned from Black Tide, said Jon. Good, let's see whether the Valkyrie brought me a nice present from those pirates, Harry said with a grin. If all went according to plan, he just got some experienced sailors from Black Tide, and they needed some personality adjustments. While he was excited to get the sailors he needed, he was not looking forward to the migraine with all the mind arts he was about to employ. So this Magister Vega Niharis is bankrolling the Cell Sails and pirates in the Three Sisters, Harry asked, an angry frown on his face as he read the list of mercenary companies that were showing their presence in the Narrow Sea. Aye, my lord. Gold and silver have been pouring into the Three Sisters for hosting the Myrish cells that Harry's Manderley ships, said Creat. Harry grunted. Is there anything else from Darrow? Only that the Magisters of Myr are seeking help from the sorcerers as far as the Shadowlands to kill you, my lord. Harry looked up from the parchment he was reading to stare at the olive-skinned sorcerer he had taken into his service. While Daro Ohedras was away gathering intel about his enemies in Myr, Krayat was handling Harry's budding spy network from the north. Perhaps it's time that we strike back at Myr, my lord, Anya said eagerly, fiery like the element of fire she wields. While attacking these Essos slavers halfway around the world is a difficult task, I must agree with my sister's suggestion. If these Magisters are determined to harm Lord Harry's interests, despite the show of power in the Westerlands, I believe drastic actions must be taken, said Cailin. Harry turned his attention to the last of the Valkyrie sisters for her opinion. I concur. But instead of attacking these Magisters with brute force, why don't we attack them at their most precious source of power, said Adela, pausing for dramatic effect. We can steal their wealth, their artisans, and their slaves. That's impossible, said Anya, shaking her head. It'll be difficult, yes, but Adela's suggestion is not without its merit, said Harry, frowning thoughtfully. It is said there are 3 slaves for every free man in most free cities of Essos. How are we going to steal their slaves? And even if we did, where would we take them? The North would never accept foreigners in large numbers, said Anya. You're right, of course, which is why we'll be doing the more efficient retribution. Harry mused aloud before turning his sights on Krayat. Tell me, Krayat, do you think you can procure me more information about the Myrish banks? Harry inquired. It can be done, my lord. Krayat hesitantly said. What sort of information do you require? I want to know who are their major investors, I want their names, and I want a list of all properties they own in the city. I also want any information you can find about their bank's strong rooms. Strong rooms, my lord, Krayat asked, confusedly. I want to know where they store their gold and silver. I want to know everything worth knowing about their banks. It'll be done, my lord. Krayat bowed. Dismissed, Harry said, watching the warlock walk out of his throne room with nary a whisper. Once the doors of the throne room closed, shut behind the warlock, Harry stared at the ceiling thoughtfully. His spy network was not as deeply entrenched as he liked, but it was coming along nicely. Darrow had started recruiting spies in the free cities, ever since the former warlock of the House of Undying was rehabilitated. While funding the spy network was not a problem, the real impediment came in the form of recruitment, communication, and transportation. The free cities were too far away, so travel time was an issue which wholly depended on the climate in the Narrow Sea. Due to such long distances, large communication gaps were also to be expected. Both of those factors also hampered recruitment, at least for a short time. Over time, Harry was confident he could increase the number of spies in his employ. But Harry knew transportation and communication were vital to augmenting a spy network. This led him to the thought of accelerating his plans for setting up portkey networks across both continents. What is the status of the rune snitches? Harry asked. We have not completed the project, my lord. We'll need more time for the carving to finish. How long? Harry stared at Adela, who flushed under his scrutiny. 3 weeks, Adela said hesitantly. Harry wanted to ask them to speed up the process, but he held that back. He knew the difficulties faced by his rune carvers. He wanted the map tracking done near the Bight to give an edge to the Manderley fleet. But he supposed he ought to wait for 3 weeks and take his time to perfect the map. It was imperative to get a close eye on the sea lanes close to White Harbor and the Three Sisters. Maester Marwyn, has there been any word from the Bravosi? Harry inquired, looking at the old Maester. I'm afraid not, my lord. Harry was expecting that. While the Bravosi fleet could deter pirates and sails in the Narrow Sea, they could not enter the waters surrounding the Three Sisters willy-nilly. It'd bring them in direct conflict with the Vale and the Iron Throne. The best thing that he could do right now was to plant the wards and charms encompassing the Bight to grace out the map. That way, they could track the pirate ships and destroy them all where they anchor. That was the least costly solution. Right now, escorts were provided by the Manderley fleet to merchant ships coming in and out of White Harbor. Perhaps you could ask Lord Stark to petition the Iron Throne to interfere with the Sistermen. The harvest feast is in 2 weeks, and all the lords of the North will be assembled in Winterfell. A strongly worded request ought to bring the small council to act when the taxes are counted in the capital. Maester Marwyn suggested. Harry couldn't help but snort in derision at Maester Marwyn's advice. You think Jon Arryn hasn't tried? Harry asked with a chuckle. Lord Arryn is many things, but he is not one to turn a blind eye. He tried his best to rein in the idiots at the Three Sisters in his capacity as the Warden of the East. Unfortunately for him and us, the Sistermen have always been rebellious. You think the Sistermen are rebelling against the authority of Lord Jon Arryn? Maester Marwyn asked with wide eyes. They're ignoring his direct orders, aren't they? Those idiots are blinded by greed and the promise of easy wealth. They provide sanctuary to Myrish Selzen pirates while earning a portion of the bounty without committing much, Harry said, his face darkening as he narrowed his eyes at the painted floor. He stood up from his throne and stood over the painted map of Westeros, looking at the 3 islands that were giving ships from the North Soul port city grief in the seas. Send a raven to the arbor. Impress upon them the need to deliver the ships as fast as possible. I believe the Sistermen are at a place where words are wind. They'll only understand blood and death, Harry muttered. Harrion? You asked for me! Harry looked up from his work of craving runes into a small stone to see Jon standing near the door of his office. Take a seat, Jon, Harry said. As Jon dropped into a chair across from his table, Harry finished carving the runes and gave a last inspection of his work. Finding no fault, he placed the runestone inside a metal ball and dumped it into a safe where all the finished snitches were stored safely. Once the numbers were satisfactory, Harry was supposed to deploy them on the Bite without anyone's knowledge. Maester Marwyn tells me that you've been diligent in your studies and training. I have. I mastered the spells that you wanted me to learn, and I've been training hard in the yard, Jon said immediately. I know. Master Marwyn said that you are now capable of creating magical shields. Is that true? Harry asked. Yes. I can use the Protego charm, Jon said happily. That was not a charm I told you to learn, Harry said blandly, bringing a pause to Jon's joy. Yes, but Jon spluttered, searching for words. You took the initiative and searched for more spells from the books in the library. You found magic more interesting instead of solely focusing on swordplay, Harry commented, raising a curious eyebrow when Jon didn't respond. Well, yes. You were away for too long, and I didn't have a good training partner, other than Jaceera, Jon muttered. Good. I was starting to think you were turning into another Robb, who put too much emphasis on swordplay, Harry said, climbing to his feet with a faint smile. Come, let me see how much you've improved with magic. Harry led Jon into a hall that was warded from top to bottom, and closed the door behind him with a flick of his wrist. Defend yourself, Harry said before a tongue of flame shot out of the palm of his hand. The power ring on Jon's hand pulsed with power. A blue shield materialized around him in an instant, capable of withstanding the flames Harry produced. Harry raised an eyebrow, seeing the dense magical power that he could feel emanating from the power ring. His growth was impressive, Harry mused. Harry followed the fire spell with a couple of stunners, and Jon managed to maintain the integrity of the shield spell until it broke off against the 5th stunner. Impressive. You've developed far beyond my imagination in a short time, said Harry, acknowledging Jon's effort and skill in display. Harry was not even saying that to make Jon feel better. Jon was only 12 years old, and already he was capable of producing a robust magical shield. Considering the fact that all the wands he had made to date had refused to bond with Jon, it was a pleasant surprise to see his brother was performing well. Maybe I did something wrong with the wands. Unicorn hair might not be the best core for Jon, Harry thought. It was not like he had any other option for a core material. The red crowns he found in Skane refused to part with their feathers, and Harry wasn't going to take it from them forcibly. The unicorns, bless their soul, were happy to part with some hairs from their tails. It was the only reason he managed to make some wands, but a fat lot of good that did to him. He was left with a bunch of useless sticks because none of his wands made an impression on Jon and Robb. He held out hope that the wands would react to his sisters when they turned 11. Otherwise, he'd have to find other prospective welders like Elsera Snow, who had more of a reaction to the wand he offered. Even none of his Valkyries showed any affinity to the wands he created. I've worked diligently on learning spells as you asked, said Jon. Harry hummed. I've never missed my lessons with Maester Marwyn, and I've been training in the yard every day. Maester Marwyn told me he was all praises for you, Harry said, already knowing where Jon was leading him. Can you tell me more about my mother now? I promise I won't tell anyone else. If that's what you're worried about. Harry took one look at the pleading eyes of his brother, who was actually his cousin, and caved almost immediately. Jon reminded him of his younger self, and he'd be a hypocrite to hold back such a piece of information from Jon for so long. All right, I'll tell you after the harvest feast. I'll have to inform our father that I'm telling you the truth. Perhaps it'll be better to know your mother's identity in Winterfell. Uncle Benjen will also be there. They know more about your mother than anyone else in the Seven Kingdoms, said Harry. The excitement of Jon upon hearing Harry's promise to reveal his mother's name was quite palpable. Harry even felt a touch sorry for Jon, who'd most likely be crushed upon hearing the circumstances behind his birth. But he supposed it was inevitable for Jon to learn about his mother and father at some point. Truth had a habit of emerging, despite the many attempts to lock it away. Before we go to Winterfell, there is a funeral that we need to attend, said Harry. A funeral? Did someone die? Jon asked confusedly. You'll see, Harry muttered. That's a huge cliff, said Jon, pointing a finger at the admittedly huge cliff that they were supposed to traverse. Don't be so melodramatic. The rest of us have eyes, brother. Harry patted him on the shoulder, starting the steep climb that was hampered by slippery boulders. That's not what I meant. Who's having a funeral on a cliff? Jon muttered, his teeth chattering as the frigid air from the sunset sea blew into the land, carrying the salty scent of the sea. You'll see, Harry said enigmatically while continuing the trek without a pause. After several minutes of hiking, they arrived at the top of the cliff. Harry heard the distinct gasp from Jon, as well as his Valkyrie guards, when they saw 5 children of the forest waiting for them under the shade of a giant heart tree. The tree was pearl white like the heart tree in Winterfell's godswood with a face carved on its bark. Its leaves were vibrant and shined blood red under the sunlight. Spring. Harry nodded at the sole familiar face among the local druids. Stark, Spring nodded. Shall we begin? Begin what? Jon whispered. Harry was a bit amused by the impatience shown by his brother as it was masking the fear he was feeling. While Jon had grown out of his fear of ghosts, the children brought some of that repressed fear to the forefront. After all, he had filled the head of his brother with all sorts of fake stories about the children and how they were the ones to create ghosts that roamed Winterfell. Harry fished out a small box from his pocket. Opening it, he summoned the contents of the box hidden inside the box. He could hear his companions gasp as a huge skeleton was dragged out of the small wooden box and allowed to float in the air above their heads. The huge ribcage, consisting of 44 long white rib bones, created long shadows on the cliff as it towered over the highest branches of the heart tree. Is that the bones of a dragon? Jon whispered in awe. Close. It's the remains of an ancient sea dragon. I liberated it from the Naga's Hill in Old Wyke. The Ironborn used to conduct their Kingsmoot on the hill inside that ribcage, said Harry, moving the skeleton over the edge of the cliff. Now, they'll never hold Kingsmoot because they'll never have an Ironborn king. The children whispered something into their fists before they let the weirwood leaves in their palms fly over the cliff. Seeing Spring nod in his direction, Harry canceled the levitation spell and allowed the skeleton to fall into the sea. For a moment, nothing happened before dark clouds gathered in the sky. The winds gained strength and howled in their ears, while Harry felt a tremendous gathering of magical power in the land. When he looked over the cliff, he saw the sea had turned bright green. A slight pressure built up against his mind, alerting Harry of an intrusion into his mind. He allowed the foreign energy to enter his mind, and he was shown an image of a giant sea dragon with green scales and broad wings that stretched out forever. Golden horns adorned its head, and gold were the claws. Its eyes were also bright gold. Unlike other dragons, this one had the body of a snake from its chest down. Harry felt the world around him shift on a dime, and in the next moment, he found himself standing on a rocky hill surrounded by green hills and a giant green sea dragon. You have my gratitude, wizard. You'll find that the seas will bend to your will, said the dragon, before a green energy flared up around Harry briefly, before dying down. Harry blinked, and everything around him returned to normal. The giant green hills and the sea dragon were nowhere to be seen. A green aura was surrounding Harry, but it flickered out just as the green sheen in the sea below the cliff dissipated. You planned to have a school for magic for the young ones, didn't you, Harry and Stark? There'll be no place that'll be better than this cliff. Build your school here, and the spirit of the sea dragon will guard this place till the end of times, said Spring. Tyrion stared at the parchment that was in his hands. His eyes went through the words once again to make sure he had read everything right. His hands were shaking, and it had nothing to do with the cold. His hands were shaking from the realization that he had to sign the document that see House Lannister into puppets worth nothing to House Baratheon in perpetuity. It'd be the most humiliating agreement ever signed by a Lannister. He was sure many generations of Lannisters would curse his name, call him all sorts of names, and blame him for everything that went wrong somehow. But Tyrion had no choice but to sign the agreement. If he was to take up the mantle of Lord Lannister and rule Casterly Rock, he'd be Lord Lannister in name only. And he'd have limited control over the castle due to the many commitments he'd be bound to oblige after he signed the document. Lannisport was now lost to House Lannister. All the revenue and lands around Lannisport were now in the crown's possession to be handed over to anyone they liked. As if that was not enough, he was obliged to pay the Iron Throne 10 million gold dragons over a period of 20 years. All the debts the Iron Throne had with House Lannister were also wiped away. The Iron Throne also took House Lannister's treasury as reimbursement for all the lords of the Reach who suffered under the attack of the Lannister armies. Even their recently acquired Valyrian steel sword was lost to them. Tyrion gritted his teeth, knowing that he'd be the laughingstock of the Westerlands and the Seven Kingdoms once he signed the agreement. The only thing he and his uncle had managed to negotiate in their favor was the clause about capturing Cersei and Myrcella. They had to plead and grovel at the feet of Stannis Baratheon and Jon Arryn to avoid such a commitment. Jon Arryn had promised the restrictions imposed on House Lannister could be lifted when the Iron Throne was confident of their loyalty. It's a roundabout way of saying no in a polite way, Tyrion thought. The only tangible way he could see in restoring House Lannister's power was through war, but not one they were capable of waging anytime soon. It'd have to be started by someone else, and then Tyrion could join if fortunes aligned and bring Stannis Baratheon low. Tyrion let out a sigh as he looked at his uncle, who nodded grimly. "These terms are acceptable to us, your grace," Tyrion softly said. "Good. The copies of the agreement will be made, and we'll have it signed on the morrow," said Jon Arryn. "You made the right decision, Lord Lannister." "May I ask what is to become of my uncle, Kevan Lannister?" Tyrion asked. "His Grace has decided to hold his execution on the morrow for his part in invading the Reach and burning countless villages and taking the lives of many innocent people," Jon Arryn said with an emotionless face. "Kevan was merely following orders. Isn't it enough to take Tywin's head?" Jarion asked, a pleading look coming over his face. "I implore you to show mercy, Lord Arryn. Hasn't enough blood been spilt already?" "I had advised His Grace to sentence Sibber Cailin to the wall. Unfortunately, His Grace is adamant in his decree. It doesn't help we'll be looking at one of the worst winters because your armies burned the ripe fields of the Reach and forced a costly war on the Seven Kingdoms. There is nothing that I can do to change His Grace's mind." Tyrion's and Jorion's faces fell at Lord Arryn's reply. They remained silent as Lord Arryn left them alone in the chamber. "A Lannister always pays his debts. We'll have our day, Uncle. I promise you that," Tyrion said firmly, glaring at the seat where Lord Arryn sat. "You should not have promised such a thing to Jon," Eddard said with suppressed anger at the actions of his second son. "Why not? Jon is old enough to handle the truth," Harry argued. "No, he is not. You are not old enough to decide what is good and bad for Jon. He is my blood," Eddard thundered. "And Jon is my brother. He has lived to this day, fearing his mother abandoned him. Or you forcefully took him from his mother," Harry retorted. "He deserves to get closure. Let him know the truth so that he could learn how much his mother loved him. You think the truth won't be any less painful. Now, he has a family. He thinks I'm his father. When the truth is revealed, he'll have no one," Eddard shouted before forcefully calming himself by taking a deep breath as he leaned against the heart tree in the God's Wood. "You're wrong, father. You underestimate Jon. He deserves to know the truth about his mother." "It's too dangerous." Eddard shook his head after a moment of silence. "There are many enemies out there that come after Jon if word of his parentage reached their ears. The North has the strength to withstand any attack from any of those enemies," said Harry. "At what cost?" Eddard asked, narrowing his eyes at Harry. "We have enough blood to spare, father. Besides, do you think the Northerners would sit idly by as some prissy Southern lords turn hostile against House Stark? The House of Dragons are no longer in power, and the South is not strong enough to fight against the Winter Kings," said Harry. "There are no Winter Kings left in the North," Eddard said heatedly. "Of course there is. I'm conversing with one," said Harry. nodding at his father, for emphasis. I'm no Winter King, Eddard scoffed. Oh, but you are to the Northerners. Do you think the Northerners think of Stannis Baratheon as their king? Harry smirked, seeing his father going silent. You already know the answer, father. The lords of the North have already made their opinions clear, have they not? It doesn't matter. I've sworn an oath of allegiance to Robert, and now Stannis. Eddard said firmly. Our family had sworn oaths to Targaryen kings, yet you fought against them and helped Robert Baratheon usurp their crown, Harry pointed out. Eris brought that upon his head, as did Rhaegar, with their actions. Eddard defended himself. Still, you could have declared for Aegon VI and installed yourselves as his regents. Instead, you and your friend walked over the corpses of Rhaegar's children to seize the Iron Throne. Harry accused, making his father shoot a glare at him. That was not our doing. Tywin Lannister butchered those children. And yet your side benefited from it and rewarded Lord Tywin for his loyalty. Harry gleefully pointed out, which made his father go silent. Tell you what, father, if Aegon VI was alive, would you fight for him or Stannis? Harry asked. Which oath will you honor? The oath Torrhen Stark swore to Aegon, or the one you swore to Robert Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon? It does not matter. Rhaegar's children are dead, Eddard said with a sigh. What if I were to tell you that Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, actually lives? Harry asked quietly, staring coolly at the wide eyes of his father. What? What did you say? Eddard asked with wide eyes. Yes, father. Aegon, the sixth of his name, is not dead. Tywin Lannister never got his hands on Aegon. That day, he was spirited away from the capital by Targaryen loyalists. And now, he has returned to Westeros to reclaim what he thinks is rightfully his. No, Eddard whispered in horror. Yes, war is coming for Stannis Baratheon. The southern kingdoms will be buried under rivers of blood as they fight war after war over that infernal throne. Do you think the lords of the North would fight for Stannis when Aegon comes for his throne? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. As loyal as his father was to the Baratheons, Harry knew his father could also see the truth of the situation. In truth, the North was suffering from the absence of House Targaryen and their degradation as an old ally. The last Dragon Lords were feared and respected in the North, not merely because they were riders of dragons, but also because they gave the North nearly 3 centuries of peace. Despite all the hiccups the Targaryens faced in their reign, Aegon's one promise stood firm throughout their reign. The North never faced an Andal invasion after Aegon was crowned king. Even when Baelor the Blessed reigned, the North remained the heart of First Men culture because the small council kept the fanatics at bay. Without the Targaryens at the helm, the Northerners were not keen to follow an offshoot family born from the last daughter of the Storm Kings. If the Targaryens were respected, the Baratheons were merely tolerated in the chaos of the rebellion. But all the goodwill House Targaryen earned after the dance ended when Aerys Targaryen killed Rickard and Brandon Stark while the Mad King's son kidnapped Lyanna Stark. Even after all these years, the exact reasons for Rhaegar's actions were sketchy at best. Bloodraven had told him about the Song of Ice and Fire, but that whole story sounded like a load of crap to his ears. If Rhaegar had been set on taking a wife from the Starks, he could have done that by not marrying Alia Martell and approaching Rickard Stark with a marriage proposal down the line. Yet, nothing of the sort happened. By Bloodraven's own admission, the Silver Prince never looked north until he chanced upon Lyanna Stark at Harrenhal. He had asked for more information, but Bloodraven was tight-lipped. Unfortunately, Harry could not discern whether his aunt went willingly or was spirited away by Prince Rhaegar. He was not mad enough to dip in the ocean of knowledge contained within the nodes of the weirwood trees. Those sacred trees were the abode of the old gods. Their power and knowledge was ancient and vast. As powerful as he was, Harry was not idiotic enough to mess with the abode of gods. They were the most powerful in their realm, as the Valyrians found out painfully. If anyone needs to see the power of the old gods, one only needs to look at the doom of Valyria. How do you know this, Harrion? Eddard asked after a long moment of silence. I know many things, father. Trust me when I say that. Aegon is already in Westeros, and he is gathering an army to his side in the shadows. The southern kingdoms will take sides, and war will be waged between friends and family alike, said Harry. Is that why you scheme with Lord Manderley? Are you preparing for war? Eddard asked. No, father. I'm preparing for independence. The North's independence, said Harry. They stared into each other's eyes. Gray met gray, and neither budged. We'll be alone and without allies once the southern kingdoms gather under one king, Eddard said with a sigh. You have me, the Northmen, and Moat Cailin will turn the neck into the graveyard of the Andals. I'm sure their ancestors will like the company, said Harry, shrugging his shoulders. Aren't you forgetting about our enemies to the north? How could I forget? Harry rolled his eyes. Trust me, I have a plan. You're playing with the lives of thousands, Harrion. I mislike the place we find ourselves in. Eddard grumbled. Even if we can take advantage of the strife in the south to declare independence, the north will bleed in the future after our time. You're right, of course. There is no guarantee that we can maintain our current strength in the future. But I believe the Southerners would think twice to wage war against the North in the future when we can field dragons against our foes, said Harry. What did you say? Eddard asked with wide eyes. I think it's better to show you, Harry smirked, taking a shrunken wooden box from his pocket. A few minutes later, Harry was afraid his father was about to suffer a heart attack. It was the first time his father came across an ice dragon. Winter had also grown as large as a horse, so it became even more intimidating for the Lord of Winterfell to accept the fact that an ice dragon was now standing inside the Godswood of Winterfell. How? How is this possible? Where did you find this creature? Eddard trailed off, staring at the icy blue dragon, now quietly munching on the leaves from the heart tree. Her name is Winter, and she's an ice dragon. I found her egg in Skane and hatched her after I built Avalon, Harry explained. But, ice dragons are a myth. Eddard stuttered, staring incredulously at the dragon as it stopped munching on the red leaves of the tree, and instead started shaving off small pieces of wood from the tree and began drinking the green paste that rolled down. As you well know, father, many myths have a grain of truth to them, said Harry, staring pointedly at his father. Is it dangerous? Eddard asked, hesitantly. Do you want to touch her? She's very friendly, and she does not eat meat. You needn't fear her, said Harry, leading a reluctant Eddard towards Winter. The ice dragon had stopped drinking the sap of the heart tree when Harry brought his father close to it.
Winter.
This is my father, Eddard Stark. Harry introduced his father to the ice dragon. The corners of his mouth turned up when Winter placed her full weight on her hind legs and outstretched a clawed hand to his father as if to shake his hand. The incredulous look on his father's face was a sight to behold. Ice dragons are fiercely intelligent, Harry explained. My lord, what you're suggesting is ambitious and dangerous, Wyman Manderley said, with a troubled look on his portly face as he stared at the map neatly laid out on the table. Also expensive and impossible. Barbri Dustin snarked, a disinterested look on her face while looking at the map with folded hands under her chin. It's not impossible, and any expenses incurred will be covered by myself, said Harry. Except for the lands we stand to lose to build your impossible canal, Lady Barbary said, shooting Harry a frosty look. On the contrary, I'd see you get duly compensated. I can buy the land from you, at a reasonable price, of course. Buy my land. I don't think I agreed to anything, Lord Stark, Lady Barbary said snottily. And I don't recall asking for your permission, my lady. I was stating what's going to happen. Harry said firmly, pinning down the haughty woman with a stare alone. Lady Barbary shook herself out of the stupor and glared at Harry. You are overreaching yourself, Harry Stark. I'm the lady of... You are the widow of the late Lord Dustin. You remain the Lady of Barrowton by my father's grace. Your title can be easily undone by the stroke of a quill. Keep that in mind, Lady Dustin. Harry warned the haughty woman who thought herself to be some sort of grand player in the local politics of the North. The North was a highly martial place that had no place for women who could not contribute to the defense of its people. The Mormont women were capable of ruling their island because they were warriors. For centuries, Mormont women had fought side by side with their kinsmen in defending the island. For this reason, a Mormont woman ruling Bear Island was not contested by anyone in the North. That was not the case for Lady Dustin. Harry doubted the woman had ever so much as used a kitchen knife in her life. She was a haughty, arrogant woman with a genuine grievance with his father, but that doesn't mean he'd allow the snobbish idiot to walk all over him. I know when I'm not needed, Lady Dustin said coldly before standing up from her seat with a glare. I will not be talked like. Pettiness does not suit you, my lady. You may have genuine grievances with my family, but when it comes to the prosperity and security of the North, I expect you to put that aside and behave in a manner that befits your station. Otherwise, you'll find me less forgiving than my father," Harry said coldly. "Now sit down or welcome my enmity by holding on to your pettiness." There was a long moment of silence, where Harry glared at Lady Dustin until the woman slowly sat down on her seat. "Good. Now that we've dispensed with this childishness, we can discuss important matters. The proposed canal passes through the neck, cutting through the lands belonging to House Dustin, House Stark, and House Manderly, north of Moat, Cailin. House Manderly has a fleet to guard the mouth of the canal in the east, and therefore I see no reason to purchase the land belonging to your family, Lord Wyman," said Harry, nodding at the Lord of the White Harbor before setting his sights on Lady Dustin. The Dustin lands, on the other hand, is another issue. You lack a fleet to guard the mouth of the canal in the west. Either Lord Manderly's fleet or mine own must guard the western mouth of the canal to deter the Ironborn from capturing the canal. If you were to sell the land the proposed canal passes through, it'd enable us to build fortifications and a small port to anchor our ships. Why did you even invite me, if you wanted to make all the decisions? Does my opinion have no meaning here? Lady Barbary asked, staring at Harry and Lord Manderly. If your opinion is not to build the canal, then it's stupid, and rejected categorically. Harry deadpanned. Very well. Do as you please, boy, but keep in mind that I have allies, and I'll see what Lord Stark has to say about all this. Lady Barbary said frostily before taking her leave from their meeting room, "She does not understand the value of what you're suggesting, Lord Harrion. With this canal, we'll control one of the most lucrative trade routes in the known world," Lord Wyman said, his eyes feasting on the line drawn representing the canal on the map. "On the contrary, she knows the importance of the canal. She just doesn't care, as her sole focus is to obstruct anything we do because of her grudge," Harry muttered. "That is dangerous, Lord Harrion. While Lady Dustin is a harmless mule, her family is not. Lord Risewell is a foe that we can ill afford, and Lord Bolton is a queer fellow. Strange rumors come out of Dreadfort of dark deeds. The Leech Lord is family to Lady Dustin, for she has a nephew in the Bolton heir." Harry broke out in laughter upon hearing Lord Wyman call Barbary Dustin a harmless mule. When his laughter subsided, Harry took the warning from Lord Manderly seriously. Making enemies of 3 major regional powers was not wise. So he came up with a quick solution on the spot. A simmering hatred for House Stark was buried inside Barbary Dustin's mind, not without cause. But stupid people with power and blind hatred were not a good combination. Such a threat cannot be tolerated to exist, Harry mused. "I'll have a word with Lord Risewell about this matter. He is a reasonable man," said Harry, for the benefit of Lord Manderly. "That's good, Lord Harrion. The North needs to be united when the time comes," said Lord Wyman. "I concur. Did you put some thought into my other proposal, Lord Manderly?" Harry asked, leaning forward in interest, to her, what the Lord of White Harbor had to say. "Minting new coins is dangerous, my lord. If the Iron Throne gets wind of our activities, we'll be declared traitors, and war will come to our shores before we are ready," Lord Wyman cautioned. "And that's why they'll never know. I'm proposing we start a bank and mint new coins every year in preparation for the day we declare independence from the Iron Throne." "A bank, you say?" Lord Manderly sat up in interest. "I take it you are interested, Lord Wyman." Harry smiled knowingly at the portly Lord of White Harbor. Very interested indeed," Lord Wyman whispered. Eddard was relieved and a pinch happy that Jon had taken the truth with grace. He had expected Jon to become so angry and sad, but the boy had proven himself to be a good lad by taking in the truth patiently. Still, he was not sure whether telling the truth was the right thing to do. Even though Robert was dead and House Lannister was a shadow of its former self, he rightly feared for Joe's safety. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me." He could still hear the sound of his sister in his ears, as clear as day, despite the passing of a decade. If he closed his eyes, he could even see the bloodied form of his sister. "I hope I've not made a mistake today," Eddard thought, eyeing Jon, sitting together with Benjen and Harrion while the hall was brimming with a festive air. There were enough reasons for the lords of the north to be merry. The harvest was bountiful. This year, despite too many men having gone off to fight a war in the Westerlands, the yield was more in volume than last year, leaving many lords with the difficult task of storing the grain. He had even heard Lord Manderley complaining that there was too much grain to be shipped off, making it a hassle as White Harbor was struggling to sell the excess grain off. The devastation wrought upon the fields of the Reach had almost caused a massive famine in the south. But the harvest from the riverlands in the north kept the south fed in these disconcerting times. Most lords of the north were now happy with their coffers full of gold and silver. The small folk were richer and healthier, and the old men of the north no longer had to sacrifice themselves for their families in winter. In fact, winter itself was now a bygone threat in the north. The snows hardly tell on most farmlands. When they did so sparingly. There was warmth everywhere, and that kept the small folk happy. All these miracles were attributed to his second son, and the goodwill that came with it was attributed to House Stark. If the Northerners respected the Starks in the past, they worshipped his family now. Those who had a lesser opinion about his wife on account of being a foreigner had shut up. Some had even gone as far as to say his wife brought great fortune to the north. If Eddard had to take a guess, there was not a time in the north when the people both feared and respected House Stark this much. The element of fear was also a reality. Eddard acknowledged it was no secret Harrion brought down Lannisport and Casterly Rock. His son had also conquered 2 islands of the Iron Islands and smashed the Iron Fleet. Those accomplishments were enough to make people fear and respect Harrion's power. It was one of the reasons why the lords of the north consistently pursued a betrothal. Manderley, Karstark, Ricewell, and many other houses had approached him, offering their daughters for Harrion and Robb. Right now, he was holding another one of those betrothal offers. This time, it was from Dorne. Eddard had never bothered with informing his sons about the innumerable betrothal offers he received across the 7 kingdoms. But this one was different. Prince Doran Martell was offering the hand of his daughter, Princess Arianne, in marriage for Harrion. It was the first time a princess of Dorne's hand was offered in marriage to a Stark in the North's history. Since Arianne Martell was the heiress of House Martell, Prince Doran was essentially offering them Dorne. If Harrion were to marry Princess Arianne, their children would rule Dorne. He wanted the best for his children, and he could only think of a royal match as a better offer than the current one. On the other hand, Eddard was not blind to the danger of such a match. If his son spoke true, then Aegon Targaryen was gathering an army to reclaim the Iron Throne. While Harrion never divulged anything else, he could guess where Aegon Targaryen was safely plotting against House Baratheon. Undoubtedly, it was from Dorne with the support of the prince's uncles. If that was the case, he could see why Prince Doran was offering his daughter in marriage to House Stark. Prince Doran wants to court my son's growing power for Aegon's cause. Eddard mused grimly. However, Eddard could also see other benefits of such a match. Should Princess Arianne wed Harrion, the North could comfortably sit out any conflict. Perhaps the dreams of independence from the Iron Throne, which many of his lords dream, would also become simpler if Harrion were to marry the Dornish princess. By some twisted fate, if Aegon Targaryen regained the Iron Throne, having his cousin married to Harrion might avoid war. There were many possibilities that Eddard could see, but he preferred for Harrion to marry someone from the north. He had thought of Alys Karstark as a possible match for Harrion. Lord Rickard Karstark was a loyal lord and family in all but name. Having House Karstark tied closely to his family was only a boon for stability in the north.
Ned, what are you doing here all by yourself? Catelyn asked.
Eddard was brought out of his musings by his lady wife. This arrived today, said Eddard before giving the parchment to his wife. He watched as his wife ran her eyes over the contents of the parchment. This is unexpected, but not surprising. Catelyn slowly said, "Who?" Eddard raised an eyebrow curiously. Prince Oberyn must have had a reason for staying with Harrion for as long as he did. This is that reason, said Catelyn, placing the parchment in Eddard's hand. You might be right. What do you think? Eddard asked. Despite the prospect of our grandchildren becoming the princes of Dorne, I have my reservations. Dornish women tend to be promiscuous, and Harrion's thoughts must also be considered. It's not like we lack other options in the north or the southern kingdoms. You're right, of course. Eddard nodded thoughtfully. My heart tells me Harrion is better off with a northern woman as does Robb. The Manderley girls are polite and comely. They'll be good wives for the twins, said Cailin, nodding at the hall where Eddard noticed Robb dancing with one of the Manderley girls. Eddard merely nodded and fell silent. He supposed he had to talk to the boys about their marriage as they were edging close to their name's day. This is the proposed canal, and these are the 3 new roads I'm proposing. Harry pointed at the brown lines drawn on the map of the north while showcasing the proposal to his father, Lord Ricewell, and Lord Manderley. These are extensive road lanes you are proposing, Lord Harrion. I also couldn't help but note the canal cuts through the King's Road. Lord Ricewell made his observations known after a minute of quiet contemplation. The roads are for faster troop movements in case of an attack on either mouth of the canal. We'll also have to build a bridge to connect the King's Road across the Sunset Canal. Harry hastily added, pressing his finger at the spot on the map where the canal cut through the King's Road. That's going to be difficult, is it not? Lord Wyman asked, rubbing the beard on his face with a frown. I suspect it won't be as difficult as raising a full-fledged castle. Lord Ricewell mused aloud, staring pointedly at Harry. No, it's not, Harry agreed. Privately, he thought it would be a long, winding process, mostly because he'd need the workforce to complete the roads adjoining the bridge and those connecting the mouths of the canal with the King's Road. There were also the ports he was hoping to build to deter enemy ships and pirates from transiting the channel, but he didn't say it aloud. Besides, it'd be a wasted opportunity for the North to disregard its labor. Constructing the roads to the 2 months of the canal would provide work for the small folk, and it also gave him a convenient opportunity to turn the lands between these roads and Moat Cailin into ripe farmlands. He hoped that one day, Jon would take the lordship of Moat Cailin. With the rich farmlands under the Moat's control, it could sustain itself in the future. It was a way of financially stabilizing the castle so it'd never again fall into disrepair. How long would the construction take? Eddard asked. As soon as the land survey is completed, I can deploy the runestones to sculpt the channel. I believe it'd take a year at most before all works are completed, including the roads, said Harry. I suppose that leaves us with the survey of the land and the finer details, said Lord Manderley. What followed was the most challenging set of negotiations. Lord Ricewell spoke on behalf of Lady Dustin, wringing any concessions he could try to wriggle out of them. But Harry was not willing to concede to anything he was not already willing to give. Instead of buying the land from House Dustin, how about leasing the land in exchange for a share of the tolls imposed on the ships in transit? Lord Ricewell suggested. Harry didn't wait a moment to shout down that idea on the spot before anyone else could pitch in. That would be impossible. The canal is built by myself, and the labor that goes into it is paid out of my pocket and Lord Manderley, with our fleets guarding the canal in perpetuity. What does House Dustin contribute to this venture besides land? Just as Lord Ricewell opened his mouth to comment, Harry immediately intervened. Besides, House Dustin ended with Lord William's untimely demise in Dorne. While Lady Dustin is his widow, she's not his heir. She's a temporary custodian of those lands, until my father settles the succession of the Barrowlands. Harry reminded the old lord of the Rills. We have Dustin blood in our veins, Lord Harrion, Lord Ricewell said in a quick rebuttal, as does other dozen Northmen. Their claims are just as valid and will be considered before settling the succession of House Dustin. Harry retorted calmly. That was when something Harry didn't foresee happened. He could see he walked right into a trap by the look on Lord Ricewell's face. The moment the brown eyes of Lord Ricewell connected with Harry, he read the surface thoughts of Roderick Ricewell, which forced him to act. He acted quickly by placing the Confundus charm on Lord Ricewell to force the man to shut up. Otherwise, Lord Ricewell would have demanded Barrelmeds be confirmed to Lady Barbray in return for the land adjustments Harry proposed for the canal and the roads. Due to his timely action, the plan of Roderick Ricewell never panned out. Instead, it was decided to absorb the land for the canal into the land holdings of Moat Cailin. Harry was even happy to pay a reasonable price in gold, agreed upon by the Lord of Winterfell and Lady Dustin after proper surveys were conducted for the canal and the road. House Manderley agreed to construct the road connecting the east mouth of the channel with the King's Road, making it less of a financial burden on House Stark. There was also the ambitious but entirely necessary road project that directly connects Winterfell with White Harbor under consideration. The usual route of taking the King's Road to move goods to White Harbor was fast becoming an issue because of the delays. While the King's Road was patched up a few years back after King Robert's visit, the demand for Avalonian glass was such that it was becoming increasingly difficult to have the glass transported to White Harbor in time. He had thought of using his airships to hasten the process, but he thought better of it after thinking about the loss of jobs and revenue the small folk and other merchants would suffer. The convoys from Avalon would stop at many inns along the road, which kept the small folk and the merchants in business. Therefore, the solution that didn't rob the small folk of their meager earnings was to build a new road. It also helped that a new direct road connecting Winterfell and White Harbor would also ensure the seamless movement of troops. Faster troop movements would be a boon when the time came to subdue the Three Sisters. Purging the pirates from the islands and turning them into a shield for the north would ensure their capability to repel other Westerosi fleets from attempting an invasion. The islands would also serve as a good trading hub and stopgap to reach the free city of Braavos and other eastern ports of the southern kingdoms. But first, Harry needed the waters around White Harbor and the Three Sisters under observation. For that to happen, the map had to come alive. It's time, Harry thought. The last days of the harvest feast were filled with dances and songs to entertain even the hardest men. All kinds of delicacies were on the table, with the finest wines in the Seven Kingdoms to fill their bellies for the whole night. "What's with that long look?" Harry asked, joining Jon on the balcony, staring at the full moon shining brightly in the night sky. Jon merely spared him a glance before resuming his moody state. "You know what? I think I know the place that you should visit tonight," said Harry, taking Jon's hand. "It's definitely not here." Harry started dragging Jon away from the balcony towards the place he thought Jon should visit tonight. "What are you doing?" "Let me stew in peace," Jon muttered. "I'm taking you to a better place to stew in peace. Trust me," said Harry. A short walk later, Harry and Jon stood before the stone sculpture of Lyanna Stark. Together, they lit a few candles before her tomb, lighting up the dark corners of the crypt. "What do you think happened?" Jon suddenly asked, making Harry stare curiously at his cousin. Her. Jon nodded at the statue of Lyanna Stark. "What do you think happened? Did she go willingly with Prince Rhaegar?" Harry used the Muffliato spell to muzzle their conversation from any surprise visitors in the crypts. "What did Uncle Benjen say?" Harry asked, eyeing Jon out of the corner of his eyes. He knew Aunt Lyanna better than most. "He said she was fierce, skilled than most in the tilts, and half a horse. Other than that, I now know more childhood stories of her, but that doesn't really answer any of my questions now, does it?" Jon muttered darkly. "Does it matter whether she went willingly with Rhaegar?" Harry asked after a moment of silence. "Of course it matters," said Jon. "Does it, though? Rhaegar kept her a prisoner in Dorne, surrounded by the finest knights in the realm and a bloody desert, while the Mad King murdered her father and brother. Do you think a man who loves a woman would allow such depravities to go unanswered against her family?" "No," Jon whispered. "Knowing all that you know about Lyanna Stark, do you think she was a woman who'd run off with a married man she met at a stupid tourney?" Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. "No," said Jon, shaking his head. "I don't think so either," said Harry, clapping Jon on his shoulder. "Your mother battled a fever and whatnot to deliver you safely into the world, while those supposed honorable knights were keeping her prisoner on the orders of Rhaegar in a tower in the middle of the desert. If she went willingly with Rhaegar Targaryen, it was only because of fear, not out of love. I don't know what is worse, to be an unwanted son forced on her by Rhaegar, or a son born out of an unlikely love that drowned the Seven Kingdoms in blood." Jon whispered, "Your mother's last wish was for you to grow up in Winterfell. You were her last thoughts, Jon. No matter the circumstances of your birth, she loved you more than anything else in the world." Tears rolled down Jon's cheeks, making Harry give his cousin a one-armed hug. "Lady Lyanna gave her life so that you could live freely. It'd be a disservice to cry in her presence," said Harry. Jon wiped his eyes clean and slowly regained his composure. "You're right," said Jon, wiping away the tears. "The blood of the dragon might run in your veins, but the wolf blood in you is stronger. After all, you don't look like a prissy silver-haired idiot, and instead look like a proper Stark like the rest of us," said Harry, making Jon chuckle. "Thank you," Jon whispered. "For what?" Harry asked. "For giving me the Stark name. For all this," said Jon, before hugging Harry tightly. "That's what brothers do. They look after each other," said Harry, patting Jon on his back. "Tell you what, how about we go on a trip to Essos?" "A trip to Essos?" Jon asked with a frown. "Yes, we can visit some of the free cities and even see the ruins of Valyria," Harry said excitedly. "The ruins of Valyria," Jon gasped, pulling away from the hug to stare at Harry with wide eyes. "Are you mad?" Don't tell me you're not curious to see what's left out there, said Harry with a knowing look. Of course I'm curious, but no one has ever returned alive from Valyria. You know the stories better than most, Harry. I know the stories said, by those not blessed with magic, nothing is gonna happen. After all, you have me. Harry grinned. It was not exactly an easy task to convince the Lord and Lady of Winterfell to give their permission for what was likely a long trip in Essos. But with magic, anything was possible, and he never hesitated in getting his way using the mind arts. It was fast becoming second nature to him, relying on the mind arts to get around an inconvenient situation involving other people. In this case, a healthy dose of compulsion charms and memory alteration were necessary, considering the necessity of the SOC trip. Unlike what he implied to Jon, the trip was not for sightseeing. There was another agenda in his journey to Essos, one connected to the Sunset Canal. It was imperative to have an understanding between the North and the free cities like Braavos and Pentos before opening the canal for their merchant ships. Their commercial interests had to be aligned with the strategic maritime safety of the North. There were also some agreements to be struck with Braavos and Pentos before their ships were allowed transit through the canal. By using the Sunset Canal, Braavos and Pentos could end up neatly shaving off nearly a month of sea travel and accessing the ports of the western shores of the Reach, North, Riverlands, and Westerlands. But most importantly, Harry wanted to strike an ice trade agreement with the free cities. He had allowed such talks to lapse so far because he was giving the cities enough time to show that his hold on the Iron Islands was rock solid. Not only did he demonstrate his capability of holding the newly conquered territory, but he was also showing them he was quickly building a fleet to exert total dominance over the Ironborn and possibly the Sunset Sea. If he could dominate the Sunset Sea with his fleet, he could attract merchants from Loreth, Ibn, and, if lucky, as far from the Jade Sea. The lands west of Westeros were nearly all explored, and the next frontier lay in the Sunset Sea. Unfortunately, the Ironborn hindered exploration and trade relations with new civilizations across the Sunset Sea. With the opening of the canal and the complete subduing of the Ironborn, Harry was offering them access to new markets for their wares, and they would know it the moment some sensible people put two and two together. Harry counted on the Sea Lord's court to recognize the canal's value. Once they did that, Harry was sure the massive fleet of Braavos would strategically align with the interests of the North. Once House Targaryen launched their doomed war to reclaim that useless piece of metal they charmingly call the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne. Harry scoffed, looking at the position of the Crown Lands on the map sprawled out on the table. Harry placed a carved wooden red dragon coin on the Crown Lands adjacent to the crowned stag figurine. He put another red coin inside the borders of the Stormlands. He was certain Aegon Targaryen, supported by Dorne, would wage a war on the Stormlands that spill into the Crownlands. If Viserys Targaryen also amassed enough support from Essos to help his nephew, then all the better. But they desperately needed an alliance with the Reach if they wanted to make rapid gains against House Baratheon. The Riverlords could reinforce the Baratheon troops fast enough. Maester Marwyn suggested placing the trout inside the borders of the Crownlands. Lord Hoster is a cautious man. I feel he won't move to reinforce the capital without support from the Vale Knights or the North. If I were him, I'd be wary of taking my eyes from the River Road, said Harry, tapping the long road that connected the Riverlands to the interior of the Westerlands. The Westerlands is a spent force, said Maester Marwyn. Since when has common sense prevailed amongst the lords of Westeros? Harry asked with a scoff. A bloodletting of this scale is too much of a temptation for even the least bloodthirsty of lords and knights. There is glory to be had on the battlefield, and I suspect many idiots would jump at the chance to reap some to their name. The Vale would take time to muster their army if the Targaryen forces catch the Baratheons in a surprise attack. It might become an even fight if the Reach supports the Targaryens. Maester Marwyn said, rubbing his beard thoughtfully while staring at the map. But Harry looked expectantly at the old Maester. There was a reason why he was having this conversation with Maester Marwyn. As a Reachman, Marwyn knew more about the internal politics of the Reach than anyone else. He needed to consider all possible scenarios that could play out in future wars if he navigated an optimal path that benefit the North's cause. But the Reach will never unify under House Tyrell. House Florent is now in a better position, said Maester Marwyn. Harry nodded at the point raised by Maester Marwyn. The Florents now had the upper hand as one of their own was now the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. I believe House Tyrell is about to face a decline as House Florent gains more power in the Reach. The High Towers have kin on both sides, and therefore I believe Old Town might sit out any potential conflicts. I suspect the Reach might end up fracturing. Harry hummed thoughtfully. It was a reasonable assumption to make, as the Reach had always remained disunited after the fall of House Gardner. Even during the Targaryen Civil War, the Blacks had more support in the Reach, which was thought to be the Green's stronghold. Winterfell received a betrothal offer from House Martell. Prince Doran is offering his daughter's hand in marriage to me. What do you make of that, Maester? Harry asked while he began placing wolf figurines on the islands of the Sunset Sea, capturing the interest of Marwyn. I think Prince Doran understands his nephew's chances to overthrow Stannis Baratheon are slim, and he wants to ensure the North's alliance, or at the very least, our neutrality. He'll be most happy if he could push it and make the Riverlands neutral. Marwyn said after giving some thought on the matter. I concur, Harry said, placing wolf figurines on Fair Isle, Green Shield, South Shield, and the Arbor. My lord, are you... Maester Marwyn trailed off, seeing the spread of Stark positions capturing the Sunset Sea. Yes, it's the first time since the arrival of the Andals on this continent the North is expanding its territory. It's now the time for the First Men to reclaim the lands that were lost in the invasion, said Harry, placing the last of his pieces near Sunspear on the map of Westeros. Send a raven to Prince Doran. I'll visit Sunspear at his earliest convenience to discuss some important matters, Harry ordered. But what about your visit to Braavos? Master Marwyn asked. Did you forget that I possess the fastest ships in the world, Maester? Harry asked with a chuckle. Standing up from his seat, Harry moved towards the window to gaze at the bustling harbor of Avalon. He could count almost 30 ships in the harbor. A few had sailed towards Bear Island for training exercises, including landing on beachheads and weathering storms. The ships also had to be tested to see whether they met their standards, as they had only arrived from the harbor's construction yards. More ships were slated to arrive by the end of the next month, and more were under construction in Avalon and Harlaw. The Ironborn were good shipbuilders, and their workforce was speeding up the construction work. Harry was sure his fleet would reach parity with the Red Wine fleet in numbers within 2 years. The island hopping he was planning when the North declared independence would require nothing less than a highly skilled naval force under his direct command. Fortunately, the men under his command were edging the knowledge and experience gap with the aid of his Ironborn subjects and sailors from White Harbor. It would be some eventful years ahead, especially the trip he was planning into Essos. The only thing left was to select the companions he would take on his trip to Essos. Stannis Baratheon carefully sat on the Iron Throne in full regalia as he faced the court. The jagged edges of the Iron Throne were a hassle to navigate while sitting on the Iron Throne, but he had never felt so powerful or content. Despite the demanding nature of his kingship, Stannis liked the fact that he was the most powerful man in Westeros. After capturing the treasury of Casterly Rock, his coffers were now overflowing with gold. Having control of Lannisport also added to his revenue, as he had been using his tax collectors extensively in extracting all that was useful from the city's populace. He was supposed to give the city to a trusted house, but he had so far refused to do so on the advice of Patyr Baelish. While he disliked the Master of Coin, the man was shrewd when it came to expanding the crown's finances. That was the only reason the Vallomen retained his post in the small council. Today, the court was not gathered for any petitions or resolution of any disputes. Instead, the court was gathered inside the throne room to witness the return of Godsgrief. The large oak door of the throne room swung open, and Stannis could see Renly leading Edric Storm into the throne room with Godsgrief slung on the boy's shoulder. He watched the distinct curiosity with which the court stared at his elder brother's bastard son and the hammer in the boy's hands. Stannis had tried to avoid this from happening. He had requested Harry Stark to somehow lift the magic on the hammer so that the weapon could be used by him and, in time, his heirs. But the answer he received from Harry Stark was unsatisfactory. According to the Stark boy, the magic on the hammer could not be lifted for some reason. This left the hammer entirely useless, and he was forced to leave the hammer in the same place his brother fell. According to Varys, a village had sprung up around the land where Robert's hammer fell. The villagers had even started calling the place Hammerfall. The village had sprung up in the aftermath of the war, attracting people from all over Westeros to see the fallen but unmovable weapon of his late brother. But now, the hammer of his brother was no longer in Hammerfall. Your Grace. Both Renly and Edric Storm bowed before the foot of the Iron Throne. Renly was dressed in bright blue, yellow, and red colors that waged a few tongues in the court. Thank you. Stannis acknowledged the duo with a nod. He expertly hid a grimace at seeing the flamboyant colors on his younger brother's clothes. Go, nephew. Renly cajoled Edric forward. Stannis watched neutrally as his nephew climbed the steps towards the throne. Reaching the last step near the foot of the throne, Edric Storm placed God's Grief on the floor. The warhammer remained pristine, with shiny ripples adorning its surface. Thank you, nephew. Stannis nodded at the boy. While he couldn't use the hammer, Stannis was adamant not to leave his brother's hammer in the Westerlands. Even if the future kings from his bloodline could not lift the hammer, he desired to have the weapon close to the Iron Throne. After all, his brother had spent a fortune on the hammer, and he was not above using the hammer in a similar fashion. The Targaryens used the dragon skulls. You'll serve as a squire for Sarah Bursten from now on. In time, you might earn knighthood if you're diligent enough, said Stannis. He noticed the eerie silence of the court. While his nephew was a bastard, he wanted the boy to have a life of his own under his watch. Serving under Ser Barristan as a squire ensured the boy's presence in the Red Keep. If I'm lucky, the boy would end up in the Kingsguard. Stannis mused.